My next guest is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Thanks for joining us on the program. Happy New Year. Welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Okay, so she is bragging that they're going to recover taxpayer money from pharmaceutical companies that raise their prices faster than the rate of inflation, which is caused by the government itself. So they're responding to the actions of government, and what she plans to do is, I don't know, tax them or not pay them. Either they're going to raise their prices or not produce the drugs people need. The other side of that is she's going to tax the oil companies, which they love to tax the oil companies, and what? Raise the price even higher?
Right. So as she was talking, I was just looking at her bookshelf, and I saw a book from Joe Biden. I did not see any economics text. I didn't see any Henry Hazlitt. I didn't see any Milton Friedman, any of the folks that we read, and that's not surprising at all. If you think that taxing an item somehow makes it cheaper, look, the Joint Committee on Taxation, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they looked at this bill, and they said it would lower prescription drug costs for certain drugs, but actually raise those costs for new drugs that come to market because of these backwards tax provisions and inflation control provisions that the Democrats put in there. And the same is true of oil and gas prices. They're taxing oil when it's brought out of the ground. They're assessing a methane tax that'll take place at the beginning of next year. Methane, of course, is the principal component of natural gas, which so many Americans rely upon to keep their homes warm during the winter. It's going to make natural gas more expensive at a time when utility bills are absolutely going through the roof. It's horrible economics. Not surprising at all, unfortunately.
Yeah, you know that megastorm that hit upstate New York and Buffalo? Those people are paying 30%. 30% more just to keep their homes warm. Let's talk about the corporate minimum tax. So what, $200 billion over the next 10 years? Does Biden think that makes companies want to locate or leave the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's poor tax policy once again here. It's a corporate minimum tax. It sounds good. We want to make every corporation pay their fair share. The problem is there's a lot of provisions of the tax code that incentivize investment in the United States economy. There's R&D investment incentives. There's capital investment incentives that encourage our businesses to grow, to expand, to hire more workers. And this undermines them all. It makes them less valuable. So it encourages companies to relocate overseas. It hurts the economy. And of course, these higher taxes hurt everyday Americans. Economics textbooks, one after the other, say the same thing about corporate taxes. They are passed down to consumers in the form of higher taxes, or they're passed down to their workers in the form of lower wages and less compensation. It's a tax on working Americans, especially problematic, of course, at a time when we're teetering on the brink of a recession.
The Democrats and the media have criminalized and villainized the concept of a stock buyback. Why do we need an excise tax on stock buybacks? Why are stock buybacks bad?
They're not bad. There's nothing wrong with stock buybacks. What happens when companies become over-leveraged, when they issue a lot of stock, sometimes they want to absorb that back into the company if they're not making other types of investments. That gives them the flexibility down the road to issue more stock if they need to generate capital to make investments, that is to grow their factories, to expand their operations, to hire more workers. That's a good thing. We want American companies to have that flexibility to make investments when they need to make investments. We don't want the government meddling in their private businesses and telling them how they ought to spend their money, how they ought to allocate the capital that they have. So it's just government meddling. It's raising about $100 billion on top of that $200 billion corporate minimum tax. Again, a big hit on the American economy. And the thing that really bothers me about this is these stocks, more than 50% of Americans hold stock in one form or another, maybe in their 401k plan. They may be participating in a pension plan through their employer. So as we drive down the value of the stock market, and it's been a rocky year or a rocky past 12 months for the stock market, as we all know, we are taking money out of the retirement funds for seniors that are currently retired, people that are going to retire in the very near future. It's a real problem.
Are there any other new taxes we can expect this year? Because I mean, look, I don't see inflation getting back to pre-Joe Biden levels anytime soon. In other words, they're not transitory. And now a lot of experts that were kind of on the fence about recession saying it's likely to happen, over the next 6 months.
Yeah, there's some additional provisions that were not addressed that are really important. I mentioned R&D, research and development, really important. Capital investment, very important. Some of these provisions, unfortunately, were scheduled to start eroding, start scaling back over time. They're being phased out. And that was a product of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Even though a lot of these provisions have bipartisan support, there's such a high level of dysfunction on Capitol Hill. And if you don't believe me, turn on C-SPAN and watch what's taking place. There's such a high level of dysfunction that even bipartisan good tax policy can't make it across the finish line right now. It's really unfortunate.
I just did my argument segment monologue on, I'm not pro-Kevin, I'm not anti-Kevin. But if Kevin McCarthy stood up and said, you know what, we're going to take a hard look at the flat tax and the fair tax, and we're going to debate this on the House floor. Maybe we'll have a new way to pay taxes in this country. Look, I'd be his biggest fan. I think the progressive tax code, which is basically a hate your neighbor tax code, class warfare tax code. If we had a fair tax where we scrapped the income tax and we paid a national sales tax, no income tax, look, the rich would still pay more. They buy, fancier things, nicer cars, boats, whatever it is, designer label clothes. I think making all citizens a taxpayer makes the tax system, fairer, for lack of a better way to say it, because then when they say skin in the game, you can't say fair share and some people have no share.
Yeah, and what I think needs to happen here, the House needs to become more democratic. Right now, it's a top-down institution where the Speaker, the committee chairs get to decide what they're going to vote on, and there's very little input from rank-and-file members. And I think that's why we're having a little bit of an upheaval here. I'd like to see it resolved as quickly as possible. I agree, I'm not necessarily a pro or anti-Kevin McCarthy person, but I do think this needs to be resolved because it's embarrassing for the House of Representatives and because they can do some very productive work that's really important, like investigating the billions and billions of dollars that were wasted, that were stolen from the American people during the course of the COVID pandemic. Through the unemployment insurance program, through all sorts of fraud, through the Paycheck Protection Program. All of these things need to be investigated. I talked to a bunch of Hill staff. They're raring to go. They're ready to dig into all this, to find out where this money went. They can't do anything until we resolve this Speaker issue.
And the truth is, it's not Republican or Democrat. Big government, the federal government, is very inefficient at doling out resources. It's just that simple. And no, the answer is not giving grants to states. The answer is to leave the resources and the tax dollars in the states where they originate and only tax us for the 18 enumerated powers and nothing more. I got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
All right, coming up, we are going